Now, just so we get it going.
And 3 of you today?
Yes.
3 of us.
So thank you both for coming in. I always like to start by just thanking you both for running and putting yourself through this process. I know we're not the only endorsement interviews that you're going to do or candidate forums, and I appreciate you taking the time. I know it's not the most appealing part of the process, but so again, thank you. We have about an hour that we've allocated for this, and we'll just jump right in. If you could each give us the reason that you're running and why people should vote for you. Why don't we start with you?
Well, it's just going through it, and I decided that I needed to run because a lot of the frustrations from being on the planning commission for the city of Redmond, having kids that are going into our school system, and a lot of that comes from the state level, and it was just time to step up and do something. You can't keep complaining unless you're willing to get in the ring, you know. So that was one of the main reasons that I decided to do it. Affordable housing from the planning commission side, education from the kids side.
Great.
Ben?
So I've always been pretty passionate about politics and engaged with this from a young age, and growing up here in Oregon, attending the schools and kind of experiencing some of the firsthand some of the issues that Oregon faces. I really thought that Salem could use a more conservative perspective, be a younger person's perspective who's kind of living and trying to make their way in Oregon, get a family started, see the difficulties that small businesses face. And I've really been connected to this community. My family's been connected to this community for a long time, and I really haven't seen it change, and I like a lot of some of the local aspects that have happened, but there's really a lot of issues facing our state from a broad perspective and from a conservative perspective that I just haven't been very happy with. And I was actually really interested in attending law school and preparing to practice in the local community when Representative Wisnett announced his retirement, and I had some people approach me saying, you know, we think the time is right for you to have a campaign, and we think you'd be a good candidate, we know you're interested. And I figured, you know, if I lose the opportunity to run again someday, we'll be able to present itself, but I really think a young conservative perspective in Salem would be fresh and needed for the community here.
Okay. Well, there's a few issues we discussed with the Democratic candidates, so I guess we'll just start there. And the biggest one is the PERS crisis. So I'd like to ask you what solutions that you would be posing in the legislature, if any.
Yeah, definitely. So the $22 billion deficit is a major problem, and it's really stranglehold the options. And I think the biggest impact is how it's trickled down and forced essentially mandates on counties, cities, and the local school boards. So I think, first of all, you need to cut off, and every new hire for PERS needs to be on a combined or a defined contribution 401k style model, maybe 6% matching would be my first choice. I really like the Mark Johnson and Senator Knopp bipartisan proposal, and that would be my starting point. The fact that it's gotten some support in the state Senate shows that there's a lot of reasonable agreement that can be reached and started from that point. I really like how they're talking about having to be a money market adjustment as opposed to just the defined set contributions, and I think that that's probably the first place to start with, especially since there's been consensus in the Senate, and it would be an issue of trying to bring that attitude and agreement over to the State House would probably be where I'd go with it.
Mm-hmm. But you'd be running for the House, so how would you
Well, so no, but it's already established in the Senate. So bringing their plan and showing that if we can get it to work in the House, they've already agreed. There's already some good, strong support in it in the state Senate. So we have a real applicable solution that most people, or there's some significant bipartisan support behind. So this is a real applicable solution.
I see. Okay.
Well, PERS is a big deal. Our budgets the payments that we put into PERS for cities, schools has gone up 40%, and it's about to go up 40% more in the next biennium. So it's become a real issue. We're talking about fees, roads, everything that cities could be doing for their cities, or for the citizens they can't do because they're spending money on PERS. So I do agree, I think we should do it as a 401k plan moving forward. You can't go retroactive, you can't go backwards, because you don't want to affect people in the way they plan for their retirement. And so going forward, you have to just change the plan. You have to try to, I think there was an article out recently where there was 2,300 recipients that are over $100,000 that they're getting per year. I think we have to have a cap. We have to bring it down. We can't allow these to happen anymore. Gene Wisnick just had that bill that passed that was for the Oregon State coach that had used Nike funds and all that added to his. So that's a good start. So we need to just chip away at PERS and make this more of a realistic program, a realistic retirement.
Okay, so I mean, but we're talking about billions of dollars of money that we don't have. So I'm not sure if either one of you have addressed that issue of where do we get the revenue for that?
So I think maybe a great place to start would be looking at expanding our tax base in terms of seeing some businesses that can utilize our natural resources return. I'm not interested in doing more tax increases, but if we build our economy more, and I think, unfortunately, given Senate Bill, was it 1528, that the governor recently signed into law, and the special session she's created where she's saying that it's going to help small businesses, that OPB recently did an article where her proposed small business plan and short session help is really only going to help, is it like 3.64% of small businesses in Oregon. So we can't be creating regulations that are hurting small businesses. I don't think that the right move to take away the tax model for Oregon off of the federal model just because they don't want the 30% tax cut is not the right move. I think if you allow that tax cut to happen, you might see a short-term decrease in revenue, but you'd invite more businesses to come and be created, so you'd really increase the tax base, and you'd encourage more businesses to stay here. And I think that that's the right approach. And if you open up opportunities such as logging, especially down more in southern Oregon and potentially in this area, you'd really see some job opportunities return that could pay family wages that don't necessarily need a college degree, so you have less debt for younger people, which will incentivize them to be able to buy homes, get their families going, and really generating some good revenue for not only the state but local economies as well. So that would probably be my first perspective and approach, is kind of cut back and scale back on some of the regulations, especially recently. I mean, quite frankly, I think that the governor's proposed short session is nothing more than political theater to try and help herself out and hamstring her opponents, especially from a fundraising perspective, since, you know, they can't, some of them can't fundraise while the House is in session.
So just so I understand, so your idea to pay down PERS is to increase the growth within the state by eliminating whatever cumbersome regulations are in place preventing that kind of
Yes.
growth. Go ahead.
I feel a lot on the same lines. I think we need to prioritize the budget. I don't think we need to increase revenue. We have a lot of revenue coming into the state. We have more revenue than we've ever had before, so we just need to prioritize our budget. And I do agree, I think logging is a good source of income. We don't manage our forest well, and if we could have more income coming from that, that would just, where it was supposed to go was towards education, so we need to prioritize that and make that happen again. There's a lot of missed opportunities in our forests, and basically that's how I think we could do it, is less regulations.
You see
prioritize the budget.
You see logging, especially for your district, you see that as a big revenue increaser for the region.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I think it's...
I'm curious about, okay, and our colleague over here brought this up at another interview. We're pretty flush with jobs right now in the state,
sure.
So, and those jobs are tend to be hard to fill. We talked about the mill.
The mill in Madras, yes.
Just, you know, not being able to staff its workers. So, how does that jive?
So I think that it comes actually from an attitude I saw when I was attending school in Oregon. Was there's this big push to have students, especially in high school, think there's basically only college. And that I saw that a lot. And I thought that there were students that I don't think wanted to go to college that were eager to hop right into the workforce, especially, you know, students I knew who really enjoyed shop class and succeeded there, and they were told, well, you should go get an engineering degree. Well, they went to college to get their engineering degree and they really struggled, and they either swapped into a different program and incurred a lot of debt, and maybe they didn't even complete their degree, but if they got their degree, now they have this English degree, all this debt, and they feel like, well, I have to be finding a career that utilizes this degree that I spent all this money on. So I actually think that there's a huge problem, especially in the millennial generation, that we were pushed to go get degrees because that was what a lot of our parents did, and it created a lot of success for them. But given the huge costs of public or college education, that it basically flooded the market with degrees that people weren't necessarily able to translate into a fiscal opportunity, and it's also removed them away from their local communities now. You know, if you have a bunch of debt in an English degree or any degree like that, are you going to move back to Madras to go to the mill? Maybe, but you probably have to move in with your parents first, and that's going to hurt their retirement ability. So I really think that part of this attitude that has to return to education is there needs to be more hands-on learning opportunities. There needs to be a diversified education system so that we can really see different education opportunities to diversify our economy in the long term. And that's something that's a huge issue for me, is the attitude and approaches with school and this generation. Because now...
So voters in 2016 did vote in Measure 98, which was fostering career and technical education. Yep. So would you expand upon that? Is there a specific thing that you have in mind?
And I think that's a great direction to take, and I think that shows there's an attitude. I'm not sure that expanding on that program through generating more taxes for it, but I think trying to find a way to cut administrative PERS costs is the first step to try and do that, so that school budgets can be more focused then on educating the students and getting the dollars into the classrooms to help them out. You know, I mean, my wife is an educator, my mom's an educator, and they talk about the costs that face them in the classrooms and those difficulties. And I, for one, to help them out, would like to see a proposal where any penny a teacher spends in a classroom is tax deductible. And I think that that's a huge way that it actually translates to values.
It is tax deductible.
What, at the federal level, I'm not sure, at the state level.
So I'll give you a chance to
Sure.
step in on that original question.
Same aspect for housing. We have subcontractor problem. We have people that it's hard to get to build houses. It's hard to get framers, plumbers, electricians, painters, because there's just not enough people to do the work. And that's part of the aspect that makes housing affordable. Our subcontractors charge twice what they did in 2008 because it's just there's too much work and not enough workers. So I think we could create a program at COCC, much like Klamath has, to train tradesmen. You know, and then that would fill that gap. So you have schools that can fill where we need positions, and COCC is a great place to do that.
How would you see yourself being part of that effort as
well, it's the schools, they have a kind of a rotation on how they ask for money, which schools do it, and COC's term is coming up next year, so I would definitely partner with Shirley Metcalf and their board to try to get something approved, and then try to see what we can get to best fit for the community. I know Redmond, we love COCC, we have a great need up there, and I think they want to move their auto tech program up there too, so I think we're looking forward to that.
Shifting gears a little bit, maybe each of you could talk to the bridge issue that seems to be riveting attention on our district statewide.
Yes. Interesting.
Maybe you could start this one. Is there a solution? What's the solution? What's your solution?
Well, I think we know better here locally. I think Ben Parks and Rec, if there's a bridge that goes in and it's best for the people and the citizens want a bridge, I think a bridge is the solution. I don't like outside forces or outside parties coming in and telling us how we should grow or if we should put a bridge or not. And I absolutely do not like banning a bridge in a long portion of the river. I think that's absolutely the wrong thing to do.
So I think, you know, no matter what we like or dislike, I'm pretty sure that the way the Federal Waterways Act is written, that we unfortunately don't get the final say on whether or not there's a bridge there. And I certainly think that if that option was repealed, it would be important to have a lot of big community discussions with Ben Parks and Rec, some forums, and I would host or be at least a part of any town halls that were created to discuss this issue further, because I think there is a lot of people on both sides that have expressed wanting the bridge and not wanting the bridge, and quite frankly, I think the federal waterways question unfortunately stops us from being able to really have that discussion.
Yeah, I mean, but the discussion's going to move forward. And
sure, and I mean, and that's important to have it, and I'd be eager to participate in it at any level. I think that there's...
But right now, you believe that that Waterways Act is a no-go, and you wouldn't really support moving forward with
Right.
creating that.
Well, because I feel like it would be a non-starter, that we'd just be in a position where there's more pressing issues that focus on that we could actually make a difference on
Sure.
over a bridge that even if we voted for it and allowed it,
Right.
we wouldn't be able to move forward with it on.
But you're saying, on the other hand, you would support if the
Sure.
general.
I think he's the only candidate that was against it, and the bulletin vote again for asked us the question as well. So.
Just wondering.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, what do you feel is the most pressing issue for your district?
So I would say just its values being represented in Salem and the issues of small businesses, conservative values. The Second Amendment is becoming a major question given the strength of IP 43 and 44. Senate Bill 1528, kind of like I talked about earlier, its attitudes against small businesses. And I think PERS reform are some serious major ones, but also local control. There's an attitude that the state, and even you can translate higher at the federal level, pushes agendas that we kind of have to follow and step in line with. And I applauded Redmond when they took choice, where they saw the direction of the state going with the marijuana question. And they said, well, we don't really want that in our community. So Redmond took charge, passed a law that allowed them to have the choice, essentially, by not allowing Redmond in their community. I mean, whether or not you stand with marijuana or how you support it, I think there needs to be more local control and presentation with that. And so, leading that question is, how do we get better representation of the issues facing us in Salem? And I also think, given that it's a more conservative seat, and there needs to be more conservative voice tilted towards it, who's understanding it and really connected to it. And I've been working in Republican politics here and it's statewide for a long time. I've been on party platforms. I've started the Young Republicans of Deschutes County. I've helped get Republicans elected for a few election cycles now, and I really think that there's a lot of strong response for that.
When you say there's a more conservative seat now, are you saying that because there's slightly more Republicans registered in the district?
Sure, yeah, as opposed to like
but
House
then there's
District
also
54.
more than a third are unaffiliated. So,
Yep,
so
absolutely.
It's actually the largest growing part.
Would
It's the
you
largest
find
growing
yourself
group.
representing just that conservative side, or are you factoring in the Democrats and unregistered?
Right. Well, and so that's the thing too.
Unaffiliated.
Yeah, the unaffiliated group has grown substantially. I think part of that is the motor voter registration, right? So the real question is going to be how many of those people are actually participating and voting and engaged. Now, at the end of the day, you should be voting and representing the interests of everyone in your district, but at the end, realistically and politically, it's shown through the process that the conservatives and Republicans tend to set the agenda for that district, just as Democrats seem to set or data suggests maybe in 54 more, although New Bueller might be the exception of that, but depending on how this race goes between Cherry Helton and Nathan Bodie, could show that there's, obviously you have to represent your whole district, but you still have to follow the people that support you. It's a majority rule situation for these
I
races.
think
Do you
he's,
see
I think
yourself
he's narrowed
representing-
his base to just the conservatives. As occupation, he said he's a conservative grassroots activist.
Mhm.
So, I mean, he's narrowed his base down to a small group. Being conservative is great, and in our values, but he can only point to one direction. I think I have more a broader spectrum on it. And you've asked what was important for our district. And our district housing is very important. And I'm on the planning commission, so we see hearings and we have approved master plans for housing, and we're doing a good job in Redmond, but Bend has had a hard time. They don't have any master plans that they're going through right now. The UGB expansion process was difficult for Bend. It was easy for Redmond, so we need to kind of get that process honed in a little bit better so we can make it easier for Bend and not as expensive. And they need to be thinking about it right now, because the small UGB expansion they had is not going to suffice for the growth that Bend is having. So we have a strong need for housing. We have a strong need for local control of our land use laws. I just went on a ride along with Lieutenant Peterson of the Redmond Police Department, and I asked him, I said, what is the biggest problem? What do you need from the state? And he took me to the homeless camp in the Deschutes County land, and that is a bad problem out there. They're having arson, they're having rape, it's bad, and they have an issue with getting their patrol cars out there because of the way the terrain is. They've ruined 2 cars. So this is an issue that we need to to address. And there was a citizen that wanted to come out and donate land, and they couldn't because it wasn't zoned. They couldn't have the homeless can't move over there. And it would have been great because then the police could have patrolled it a lot easier, and it could have been solved, not solved that situation, but made it a lot easier for everybody. So there are issues with the community, and it comes with the citizens. We need to help everybody. We need to get housing. We need to help the homeless. We need to help small businesses. There's a lot of issues.
Mm-hmm. I forget what the original question of this
What was the
was.
need?
The needs of the
need.
county, yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, Eugene served for 18 years in your district as a conservative. Are you, I mean, for both of you, do you see yourself left or right of Gene, and where do you see the politics of the district going? It's the first time there's been a change in almost 20 years.
I find myself pretty much aligned with Gene Wisden. I admired him. He was a great legislator. And if you ask around the building, everybody around there liked Gene and Josie. I think it's hard to know who liked who better, you know, Josie or Gene. Somebody asked me that, and I said, oh, no, don't get involved with that one.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Who was actually, well, Josie was in charge. Josie was in charge. So I see myself aligned with a lot of the issues as Gene.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say that someone actually Representative Wisnet's been a great mentor to me, mentored me when I was working on Phil's race and helped me understand some of the more local perspectives. I had started off with more experience running races over in the valley, and so it was kind of a little catch up for me to come back over here and be politically active. But I really love his focus on veterans, and that's been a very important issue for me. And I'm very connected to the veterans community around here, and I actually originally wanted to serve, and due to some injuries, unfortunately I was unable to, but I went to school at the Marine ROTC, but that's kind of how I developed a real passion for that. And I really like how he's pushed to succeed and especially boost our National Guard, and creating the bill in this last short session that I've offered them special funding to help them attend colleges. And actually Oregon's National Guard recruitment is one of the lowest in the nations right now, and I think that given how we have to use our National Guard to help us fight wildfires and manage national resources, and with the kind of the big one coming right with the referred to the hurricane or the tsunami and earthquake along the coast, we're really going to have to need our National Guard to help us and step up. And if we don't have good recruitment policies, that's really going to be a major issue for us in our ability to respond and help people. So I really like the way that he solved and took a lot of issues. I would like to be a little more engaged with the community, hold more town halls and be a little more proactive. But I think other than that, I really like his leadership style and his approach and willingness to hear all sides. And you know, I'm running a very partisan campaign, it's true, you pointed that out. But I'm very eager to sit down and have a discussion with anyone on any issues. And the upside, I think, to being partisan is you'll never not know where I stand. And I'm willing to state my positions on an area and be open about it, and I think Representative Wisnet was that way too.
How well do you think that's going to play in Salem? I mean, there's a Democratic majority. It doesn't look like that's going anywhere anytime soon.
Yeah, definitely. I think it actually will help change the discussion tone. I mean, I have a lot of close friends that are extremely left in their positions, and some of them have, you know, even tried to help volunteer, door knocking, or donated their money to me. And I think that's a reflection of, even though I have a very partisan message, I'm eager to have discussions, and I recognize that, you know, it's not one person's choice in this matter. And I just want to represent maybe a different idea in Salem. And there's a couple issues that I'm not interested in maybe compromising on my values on, but I know at the end of the day it's going to take a bipartisan approach to solve problems like PERS or make a better business community. And I think if you have a very partisan person coming forward to say, look, we need to give a little give and take here in this situations, especially for something like PERS, that'll go a long way and really change maybe the dialogue in Salem and trickle back to maybe other levels and ways we approach. You know, at the end of the day, Republican and Democrats, you know, we're Oregonians first, and we have to build a better state for all of us.
So when I talked to Gene, he told me, one of the first things he told me is, well, when you get here, you're going to have to reach across the aisle. You have to make friends over there. You have to have them co-sponsor your bill. You have to have Democrats with you, or you're going to get nowhere in here. So that would be my first plan, would be to go over and make some friends.
Yeah.
And so we can get things done. So we have the conversations together. We have give and take. You have negotiations. You can't just close yourself off. You have to be able to reach across the aisle.
Yeah. So increasingly, with the PERS problem looming, you know, compromise looks like spending increases and, you know, possibly cutting costs. But, you know, meeting and across the aisle, do you feel like a tax increase is a non-starter for you? Is that reaching across the aisle, or is that too far?
I don't think we can do a tax increase. I don't want to see a tax increase.
Okay.
I think there's so much outcry from the citizens of Oregon with all the, like I said, with the payment, the 40% more and 40% more in the next millennium, that you're starting to see these cities hurt, and you're starting to see schools hurt for all of the payments and lack of funds that they have. That this is going across in every district. This isn't just Central Oregon. This is Eastern Oregon. This is Portland. This is everywhere. So with all of these citizens talking to their legislatures, that that they know the need. So when we get over there, this is going to be a priority. We're gonna try to find a way to fix it.
Yeah, I think I kind of touched on that already, where I said, my first focus is to grow the tax base in order to fix the PERS problem, as opposed to looking to raise the tax. It would have to be.
I'm bringing it up just in the context.
Yeah, absolutely. So just in the context of compromise, there would have to be pretty extreme consensus on the other side for me to think about it, but I can't imagine any of those occurring. I think that you have to start at a smaller level window first, and I think that that's maybe a better solution to talking about maybe an end goal to where we can look at creating a 401k adjustment for new employees as opposed to a tax increase. I would be very, I would not want to do a tax increase. I would not stand for a tax increase. I would not come to the table looking for that.
Sure. Let's dial over to healthcare. So it's a big item on the legislature's agenda. Maybe you could give me your thoughts about the direction we're currently going, or any innovative ideas that you feel are going to be applied.
So I've been really unhappy with our state's direction in healthcare. I think creating it as a constitutional right was a huge issue. It opened up the state to huge amounts of fiscal liability. And given that we're at a $22 billion deficit with PERS, we can't afford to incur any more kind of fiscal responsibility where, and this was kind of the main argument that Republicans in the legislature was using against the idea of adding a state constitutional amendment was, what does that mean for the fiscal issues of the state? And considering that we've already had $75 million overpayment with Medicaid, and then a $248 million Cover Care Oregon website that didn't work, our state's track record with getting more involved with healthcare is just abysmal and unacceptable. And I think that we should look to creating incentives for more doctors to come here, for lowering costs, creating more competition, look for much more of a free market solution to try and drive down costs that would make a better environment more inviting and keep healthcare costs low and accessible to individuals. But our state's track record is just not good. And to pat ourselves on the back saying, we made this a right, well, what does that mean? Your right's all well and good if you can't afford it, but the state's not going to be able to afford it.
I touched on it with wasteful spending, with 101. If you had, with Measure 101, if you knew and you had to budget yourself as your home, and you knew that this amount of money was going to make you so much amount, and then you would take that and you would sequester that money first. Well, what they did is they didn't do that. They went and paid everything and then said, oh, well, we need this money so we can have the federal matching. So, programs like that, we need to really think we need to be smarter about the way we do that. Julie Parrish, she lined out some things that would be better for that. And then also one of the things that she discussed, and I agree with, is that all of our hospitals, they don't buy their prescription drugs together. If they were to purchase all of their prescription drugs together, we could get them at a very lower cost. And so that would save us a lot of money too. So we need to stop our wasteful spending, like with Cover Oregon and issues like 101, which is in the next biennium, and we're going to be fighting that again. We need to be creative with these issues, and we need to solve these problems and not have the next bill come up in 2 years, which is going to be bigger. We need to fix the problem.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to ask all the questions.
No. I'm just curious about the prescription drug pooling. How that works? But
they have to cooperate, all the hospitals, which is tough to do. But if you can get them together, that would save money. Then I think we can get them together.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Well, we did touch very briefly on education a couple different times, but let's talk about graduation rates and what ideas you have in that realm.
It's very scary with graduation being at 47th 2 years in a row. And then I was just at my parent-teacher conference for my son, and we are 50th in science, which is awful. And so we need to bring some of the curriculum back. We need to bring back science. We need to bring back art. We need to bring back music. All of these programs have been cut, and the biggest elephant in the room is PERS, and that's where the money's going. So we need to make sure that the schools get the money. We're giving schools a lot of money, and